Corey Hansen, also known as Ledev, and I'm back after a little hiatus. Honestly, it's been a case of work's been a little bit hectic. Also, this weekend's been hectic, which had the GP at Kansas City, which I decided to attend for a day. That was actually a really fun event to attend to. I played a lot of two-headed giant there, but it was kind of fun to see all the community out there. The artists were pretty nice. Also, just be able to pick up some cards I wanted. It was actually a really fun event. Also, of course, at Magic Fest, or sorry, I call it GP. It's kind of one of those we're still getting used to the fact that now GPs are called Magic Fest and such. It's something I'm still trying to get used to. Now, I was struggling on trying to make a deck tech video that I thought would be kind of fun to try out. And one approach I thought that would be kind of hilarious, I was like, hey, why don't we make something like a Esper kind of mid-range list and such? And I swear, I am not joking when I say this. I was originally going to make the video kind of like on the weekend of the GP and such, but I decided just to take a break and have fun at the GP and such. And to my shock, the deck that actually won the first place was actually a Esper Heroes list, piloted by, and forgive me if I forgot the name properly, I believe it was Ben Friedman, I believe is the pilot's name. He went first at the GP with an Esper list. So, before we get started on the deck tech on my variation of the list that I like to have fun with, let's actually go over this list, because this is actually a really legitimately well done list, especially for the competitive format up there. Now, I didn't pay much attention to it, but from what I heard from people who played during the event, apparently aggro was everywhere. A lot of people were playing the Gruul list, a lot of people were playing Mono Red. It was essentially with a few here and there playing some off variation lists such as Simic Nexus or the 4-color Dreadhorde deck that we've seen. But I kind of want to go over this list because this list does actually helped me quite a lot to try to tweak my list a little bit, so I figured give credit where credit's due. Now, obviously when you look at the list, it's more kind of like your take on Esper Midrange, more of a Super Friends edition. Now, this deck is heavily reliant on the 2-drops. Obviously, the mainstay is Hero, Priest, and 1. Which, for those who are not familiar with this Esper mid-range deck, or with the Hero decks in general, it's a deck that primarily revolves around this card, which is Hero, Priest, and 1. Which essentially is a 2-2 that whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you create a 1-1 token. And as you notice, the deck contains a lot of gold-based spells. So we're hopefully getting this down early, creating a lot of tokens to hopefully help us either A, be aggressive with and attack in, or B, as you kind of see with a majority of this list how they've been implementing, use it kind of defensively as blockers to help protect your more protective properties or assets, which in this case are the Planeswalkers. And the Planeswalkers pretty much is the typical ones we expect in an Esper list. A playset of Teferis, which, honestly, I think this is the one card I still underrated a lot. I personally just thought that this was a card that was mostly going to see play in Control, and that's pretty much it, just to be a way to hate out Control. The more I played with the card and the more I see it in play, I came to the realization that this is actually more a Teferi that, while useful in Control lists, it's more practical actually in mid-range lists, because that -3 being able to draw a card is very effective. Like, it is kind of one of those things where you have to be careful when to use it, but when you use it properly, it can actually be very nifty. You can use it as tempo to help bounce opponent stuff, but more importantly, you can actually use it to bounce your own stuff. Like, for example, one of the more popular plays with Teferi is sometimes bouncing an Ophakaya, especially when you need the Ophakaya Lightning Helix effect of dealing damage to a specific target. You can just bounce this enchantment to your hand, then cast a spell, and do that effect. That is an effect that I did a couple times, and it just feels really good when you do it. Like, it feels amazing. Also, another one that's close to a playset, but we kind of suspected it to be in a Super Friends list that are in these colors, Narset. This is a card where Love the character. It's kind of like how I feel about the 5-cost Teferi in some sense. 5-cost Teferi, love the character Teferi. I do think this card design was a teeny bit overpowered in my personal opinion, to the point that it kind of gets a little annoying going against it. I mean, when this card sees play in Modern, that's saying something. And it's kind of the same story here. As many people who probably played in the Eternal formats have probably can attest, you kind of see this card everywhere, especially in kind of like Modern or even Legacy style Teferi Puzzle Bots decks. Because it turns out a card that is essentially a 1/3 of Leovold turns out to be a pretty effective card, turns out. In fact, I even have one friend who's making an Oathbreaker deck with this and Time Spiral, so that's going to be fun to go against. So yeah, that's kind of the Planeswalker list, besides, at least in the early game. In the late game, their Super Friends Planeswalker is obviously 4 of Teferi Hero Dominaria. As I kind of was pre-leading before, this card is a very powerful card in these type of archetypes, in control archetypes, and even in mid-range archetypes. Just the ability to draw into your deck, dig into your deck, and use it as a tempo spell, just really good. And if you can get to the ultimate, you pretty much win the game, but the power of Teferi is you don't really need to get to the ultimate, especially with this list. You're mostly just using it as a way to dig into your deck, and a way to trigger off Hero Precinct 1 and such. Also in the top end, we have one of Liliana Dreadhorde General. This is just a really good card for our deck. We're producing a lot of tokens and such, and the effect of when a creature we control dies, draw a card is very effective. The factor that it has the double edict effect that can affect our creatures as well as the opponent creatures is very useful. It's just and yet again, kind of as with Teferi, if you get to the ultimate, chances are you win the game. So it's a really powerful card. And also one card that caught me by surprise that been put in this list, which was Command the Dreadhorde, as a what-of. And it's actually kind of makes sense, because mostly we're going to have a lot of life gain with stuff such as Oath of Kaya, and even Basilica Bellhaunt, which, yet again, another card that surprised me. Even though it's a really good card, we have enough life gain in the list to justify this as a one-of, to not go crazy with it, but mostly just bring back stuff that we think could give us significant tempo, such as maybe bring back a Bellhaunt, bring back a Teferi, if a Teferi died, bring back a Narset and such. You don't go crazy with Command the Dreadhorde, but if you do it just enough, you get enough of a tempo advantage that chances are you're going to win the game. Now, going back to the other drops in the deck, we have Basilica Bellhaunt. Honestly, this is the one card that I kind of decided to take from the list and implement into my own deck design. It's just one of those cards that you always forget exists, but then when you play with it, you're like, oh yeah, the card's actually surprisingly decent. And then in the early drops, mostly they kind of gone with a mid-range control list where since they have Search for Escanta that's both used to dig for their planeswalkers as well as their enchantments such as Oath of Kaya and such. So mostly dig for the answers and a lot of 2-drop spells, Fodder Erasure, a typical card that you will see in this list. It's kind of a no-brainer. It is just really effective card to help pay out early game. It also helps trigger stop the hero, and also stuff like Tyrant Scorn, good removal, Disbark. So, in general, this deck that won the GP or Magic Fest, however you want to phrase it, mostly it's kind of a take all the best cards currently in the meta and smush it together. But what's kind of cool about the list is kind of the fact of how it can both kind of like a mid-range deck to also a game that can grind out in the long game, which kind of makes the deck surprisingly effective. I played this a little bit over Arena, and I've been actually having a lot of fun with it. Now, one thing I wanted to try out, though, is more like with this video in general, is actually more explore the archetype in general and recommend cards that people can try out. Because, let's be frank, this deck list is surprisingly expensive, especially if you're playing on a limited budget in Arena. I mean, you need a playset of Teferis, which don't even get me started on having to get a playset of Teferis in paper, because the price on Teferi in paper is oi. And there's just stuff like the Tap Lands, Shock Lands, Liliana in general, and even now starting up, I would say if you want to play Teferi Time Reveler, go get those now. The prices have been going up incrementally, as well as Narset, though I don't think Narset is going to go up as high, personally, even though it's going to see popularity in internal formats. But what I want to do with this is actually recommend cards that, if you are going into kind of like wanting to try this Esper mid-range archetype, kind of like cards I would recommend to try your own variation of this deck. Or maybe your own variation of the specific archetype. Now, first of all, I'm going to talk about the cards that you need right off the bat for the deck archetype in general. I would say the absolute cards that you want to put in your deck, no sweat about it, is the hero. Because obviously you're brewing the deck around it, you're making a lot of tokens, and essentially just using those tokens to help you to be aggressive or defensive depending on what you do. Also, I'm going to have to figure out how to phrase this better. Another card I would also recommend playing is Teferi Time Reveler. Like I said, really good for mid-range decks, and just the tempo play with Hero Priest in 1 with Teferi is nothing to sneeze at. As well, I would recommend playing Ophakaya. Ophakaya is just a really good lightning healer spell, and just the ability of the combo of bouncing this with Oath with Teferi is very significant. I would say also recommend an early game control, kind of like ish package, like a combination of Fodder Ratios and Tyrant Scorn, I feel like is absolutely necessary. Also, I would recommend Basilica Bell Haunts. They're just really good. And honestly, this top end, I'm not going to say recommend because, like I said, I'm trying to think of ways to make kind of like price variations for people who are trying to keep their budget. Now, cards I would recommend trying out for this deck is really the way to try to make your own variation of this deck is you kind of have to decide what your approach is. You have to decide whether or not if you're going more Super Frenzy approach or if you're more going in the line of creature-oriented approach. If you're more going into a creature-oriented approach, one thing I would recommend is the Cruel Celebrant. It's a early drop that you can play in your deck, triggers off the hero, and also has a very powerful synergy effect that when both your planeswalkers and creatures die, well, the opponent loses life, you gain life. Very powerful ability. And just mostly in the list I'm playing, I usually use this as more of an insurance card than a aristocratic card. It's more just a way to build up my board presence and then play this to make the opponent either have to answer this first or just be realization that if they decide to answer the board, they're going to be losing some life. So that's a card I would recommend trying out in these type of lists. Also, another card I would recommend if you're trying to look for more budget planeswalkers rather than Narsets to fairies and such, I would recommend stuff like Kasmina. Kasmina is just a really good budget option. The factor that it allows to make your stuff really stickier to target and make it hard to remove is very nice. Plus, the ability to dig into your deck and draw and make a token is very nice, which synergizes well if you're especially going with a go wide strategy. That's a card I would recommend right off the bat. Also, if you're wanting other paths but still kind of high budget in the Mythic card varieties, cards I would recommend trying out is stuff like God Eternal Kefnet, especially if you see yourself playing more control-based spells such as Fodder Ratio, Tyrant Scorn, Disbark, Elderspell. The ability to play this as a 1 or 2 of in your deck and just have the ability to more or less copy a spell is very powerful, especially if you have a hero on the field, which allows you to get more tokens, allows you more control over the board. That's pretty nifty. Also, I would recommend trying out, if you go, I would say only I recommend this if you're going into the route with kind of like the Cruel Celebrant route. I'd say go and try stuff like God Eternal Bantu. I've been playing this a lot in my personal Friday Night Magic list, and it's been actually really good. Just the ability to sack some tokens, or just maybe a planeswalker that's not cutting its use, like let's say Teferi's at 1, I know the opponent's going to remove it on their next upkeep, then I could just play God Eternal Bantu, sacrifice Teferi, sacrifice some tokens, or sacrifice lands if I'm drawing too many lands, draw a lot of cards. Seriously, God Eternal Bantu is just a really good card, especially if you kind of take the slight aristocratic angle. Another card that's in the Planeswalkers that I would also recommend for this type of list, especially if you want to have a recursion method but don't want to go full on with the Command the Dreadhorde, I also recommend trying out Sorin Vengeful Blood Ward, mostly because it's a very powerful Planeswalker, giving your creatures lifelink, especially if you're in a go wide strategy. It allows you to essentially get a lot of life being able to peen off a planeswalker, especially stuff like Teferi or Narset, is very powerful. And the minus X effect to help bring back creatures that can essentially help build up your board presence is nothing to sneeze at. Also, another card that I'm surprised that didn't make this list, but I think it's more that they're kind of like they're mostly being a more control list, is stuff like Enter the God Eternals. Honestly, really good cards in Esper. I'd say it's more beneficial if you're playing it like in a Kefnet style list. Just the ability for the tempo you get with this card, as well as being able to mill the opponent, as well as the making the token. Very powerful effect. I like this card a lot in my list personally, but honestly, it's a give or take. And the one card that people might not see coming, but I actually would highly recommend in these type of lists is, believe it or not, if you're wanting to look for a budget option, Gleaming Overseer. Now, most people, when they look at this card, they'll probably think of it more as kind of a more draft fodder card, but the card actually has a lot more synergistic effect to our deck than you first take at first glance. The factor that you make a simple token out of it makes a simple chump blocker, and it can make an additional token if heroes on the battlefield, so we get a human and a zombie. And the factor that the one that people always forget is just the little teeny claws of zombie tokens you control have Hexproof and Menace. Very, very powerful ability, especially if we're going into a slight amass strategy. And even stuff like if you have Liliana in your deck, having your zombie tokens be able to have the Hexproof and Menace. There are many games where I had this on the field, had the amass token, and the board presence was just enough that I was able to squeeze in a single point of damage to help kill off a planeswalker and such. Don't underestimate this card. This card is actually a lot more effective in these type of lists than you kind of would take for granted at first glance. Besides that, there's other like slight little recommendations I would recommend, but mostly I would say basically if you're going into this Esper kind of like mid-range archetype, try to decide whether or not if you go creature or planeswalker orientation. And if you do add planeswalkers or creatures, try to make them both synergistic together. Like, for example, this GP list is just great with the synergies and such, and how they synergize with each together and such. Now, going to the GP list, I'll go to the list that I was playing. I was kind of took in two angles. The first angle I kind of took was making go full on with the tokens and such. As you can see, kind of like having Hero of the Priest in 1, Cruel Celebrant, had the Elder Spell. Honestly, I'm tempted to almost say you should probably put this in as a one of in any deck, especially if you go into best of one, because the amount of decks you're going to face against that have planeswalkers in it is just a no-brainer. We're in a meta where planeswalkers are everywhere. So it's usually pretty safe to keep one as a main board, just as a caution. Tyrant Scorn's in here. Mortify. Honestly, Mortify is kind of becoming more of a maybe card in this meta. It's still a powerful card, don't get me wrong, and if your local meta dictates it, I would say still play it. But it is one of those where, at least when you saw it at the GP, you don't really see that many destructive enchantments that you don't really have hard time answering to, personally. Then, I have Teferi in here, Gleaming Overseer, that. As you can see, it's more like a go-wide token synergy deck that's using cards that benefit off one another, and even ways to make just more tokens. Also just Lyra as just a way to help against aggro, and go into top end with Liliana Dreadhorde General and Ugin the Ineffable, which a budget option you can consider since, hey, it creates more tokens, and you can use as a removal spell. Now, this is the list I personally use when I go to like Friday Night Magic and such. I also put stuff in there like Jace, just as a one-of, just in case if I go against a mill list. But mostly this is for Arena. I take this out during my Friday Night Magic list. Now the list we're going to go over today, and kind of, this was the list I originally had before the GP. I decided to take lessons from the GP and refine the list to a teeny little bit. Now, keyword is, this is the deck I play for best of one of, so keep that in mind. And as you can see, I kind of tweaked it a little bit. I put a playset of heroes in the list. I went down on the Gleaming Overseer. Still think it's a good card, but I don't want to go like overboard with it. Then we still have the Outer Spell in here, Fodder Erasure, that. We have the Sorin in there, we have Kasmina, we have the Basilica Bellhunt, we have God Eternal Kefnet, we have Shalai, we have God Eternal Bantu, into the God Eternals. And honestly, one change I would change right off the bat, because since we have the Gleaming Overseer archetype, what I'm going to do is manipulate the sideboard a teeny bit. I'm just going to take out, let's say... We'll take out one Duress, since we already have main board Duress for this one. Throw in the Duress in there. Because one thing I did want to try out that I forgot in my Friday Night Magic list is I do want to try Oketra. There we go. I do want to try Oketra in the main rather than Lyra at the moment. Still a powerful card, and it's also a card that if you have the budget for it, it's a nice card in these type of lists. Nevertheless... Oh, did we accidentally put... Yeah, there we go. So, now, that's kind of the list I've been running. And sorry I kind of been dirtily on this deck tech. It's mostly I wanted to try this approach of just more like exploring the deck rather than just like go into quick gameplay. For now, we're going to jump into the gameplay and such and just have some fun with that. I might put a caption in the description below if you just want to skip straight to the gameplay though, because I do have to admit that was a long discussion on playing kind of like Esper, deck tech and such. Nevertheless, let's just now have some fun and play the deck. So, let's see. Hand's alright. We have a Fodder Erasure to answer. We have Tyrant Scorn. We really hope for Plains. But Teferi Time Reveler is fine. We can keep it, though it's kind of risky. I'm going to say that right off the bat. So, we're going to see what our opponent's playing. Judging by the Nicol Bolas emblem and all that, there's a slight hunch that they're probably playing Gritz's. Keyword is probably. For all they know, they might just like the emblem a lot, and they're just playing, like, maybe something else. So, we'll find out in a minute. So, we're going to play Fodder Erasure and see what they're playing. Okay, so, yeah, it looks like just kind of like a blue-black mill control. So, knowing what we have at the moment, we don't mind Ritual Suit that much, so that's not problematic. Narset can be very problematic, but I don't think it's too problematic. Ashiok is also something we might want to answer. That's a hard one, actually. I think the best choice is, no matter what, we have Ophakaya to answer the Narset and the Ashiok. I think I'm going to take out the Outer Spell, since we do have Planeswalkers in the list currently. We're going to throw Cruel Celebrant in the graveyard, because we need a Plains meta at the moment to play our Teferi or our Oath, so we're going to try to dig for that. I'm going to guess the opponent's going to be playing Discovery, makes sense, digs into their deck more. Also, another budget option you can consider if you're going Esper, if you want to find ways to dig into your deck more for card draw. Discovery is a surprisingly good card, plus the factor the other side of Discovery can just be used as a good tempo play. Not like amazing, especially in a meta where a lot of people are going wide rather than going tall, but something to consider. Anyway, we did got the Plains that we wanted, so we're going to take that. We're going to play Teferi. We're going to plus Teferi since we do not... Since we don't really need to bounce anything just yet. I'm going to guess the opponent's either going to play Narset or Ashiok. They're going to play Narset. And it'll be interesting to see if they decide the -2. Okay. One advice I'm going to recommend for people who do play kind of like the GP list or the kind of like list like similar to Blue-Black with Narset, I would not recommend minusing Narset right when you get it. Mostly because the main reason is because we can have the play here where we can be like, okay, we're going to play Ophakaya. A lot of people are running Shocks and Lightning Bolts type effects. We can answer the Narset right off the bat and don't have to worry about it anymore. So we're going to plus. Okay, so the opponent probably will play Fodder Erasure. Hate Out, I'm going to guess Kasmina. Yeah, I kind of had a hunch it was going to be Kasmina. Anyway, well, that's a Memoir of the Genius. We're going to play that. We're going to minus Teferi now and bounce the Elfakaya to our hand. Play it again. Just to peen our opponent. And just get some little life gains in case we draw like Command the Dread Horde and can use that play. The opponent decides to Rasket into Teferi because, well, Teferi. Okay, now we're kind of getting into the lands. So what we're going to do is play this untap. Pass the turn. The opponent will probably now think it's safe to play Ashiok, I'm going to make the presumption, and mill our graveyard. No, they decide to approach the Surveil approach. Okay. I'm going to wait till the end of my turn, or when they decide to activate Ashiok or play Ashiok, to activate the Memorial Genius card draw effect. Mostly because I don't really want to draw into cards and then be like, oh, fodder erasure and such. That would be kind of annoying. So the opponent decides to play Ashiok. We're going to activate the effect now. And be like, Lance. Let's see what they nail. Land. Milling the Liliana was pretty good. But we did got another Oath, so that's nifty too. So we're going to flip this enter and tap. We're going to play Ophakaya again. We're just going to ping Ashiok so they only have one more trigger with it. So yeah, this is your typical blue-black control list. There's the Narset. There's another Ashiok. Let's see, they hate out land, Basilica, Karn's Bastion. We really hope to draw into like an Elder Spell or something like that. Shalai, though, is going to come in handy. We're going to let this enter and tap. And we're going to save the Tyrant's Scorn just in case if they target removal our Shalai, so we can bounce it to our hand. So yeah, they pretty much flip the search. Makes sense. They're going to look for more cards. Probably going to look for an answer for Shalai if I have to make a guess. They decide to get Fodder Erasure, which does not work since we have Hexproof. Do they have enough mana to both Frasket's Contempt and Fodder Erasure? It looks like the answer is yes. So okay. We're definitely now going to bounce this to our hand. Hello, that's what we needed. Okay, so let's check our graveyard. Obviously nothing. But their graveyard is a little tempting, one could say. Yeah, I think we go for it. We're going to get a Narset, Ashiok, and Liliana. We're going to minus destroy the token. We're going to dig in our deck for it. Fodder Erasure will come in handy. And then now we're going to just mill their graveyard since we don't need any stuff from their graveyard anymore. Then we're going to Fodder Erasure. And just a bunch of fodder erasures, so I'm just going to take out the Ashiok. And best part is we have an Echelai on the top of our hand, so... They're going to hate out the Shalai, but oop. They're going to Surveil, try to draw into an answer. They don't draw the card because Narset. Yeah, it turns out negating card draw is a lot powerful in this meta. Okay, so we're going to play Shalai. So now we have Hexproof. We're going to make a zombie token. We're going to dig into our deck a little bit more. Let's take a look at the battlefield. Probably better just get the Elphikaya. That way we can play the Elphikaya. Hate out the Narset. Minus the Ashiok to get those cards away. Hate out their Narset and Doom Whisperers, which is very nifty. So now they're probably going to use their search to dig for an answer, or use Cry of the Carnarian to destroy the zombie token. It'll be interesting to see what their approach is. They might also draw into a Vraska's Contempt. We shall see. So yeah, they're going to dig. They might also try to dig for cards like the Elder Spell and such. Nah, just a Vraska's Contempt. So they're going to... Do they have enough mana to Vraska's Contempt? Not this turn. So... We're alright so far. What's their library like? 22. We're at 30. We're good. Okay, so we're going to plus again. We're going to hate out the graveyard again. Well, there goes another Narset and Liliana, which is nifty. We're going to let this in turn tap. We're going to attack in. I'm going to guess they're either going to they're going to either Cry a Carnarian now, try to take care of the zombie tokens, or just Vraska's Contempt to finally get rid of the Shalai. Which we don't mind personally, because Shalai just served its purpose, since now mostly we're not going to be drawing an excessive amount of cards. Chances are we're going to be playing the cards that we draw, so to speak. But I can see them now doing Cry of the Carnarium or Dig. It's one or the other. They decide to dig. They're probably trying to dig for an Elder Spell if they have another one in their deck. They got one. They don't have enough mana to use it just yet, so... What do we do here? We know they have a Cry of Carnarium coming up. So, what I think the best approach here is actually... Attack in. Play this untapped. Do the boop. And do something that is surprising. We're actually going to minus Liliana in this case. Mostly because I feel like the card draw is a lot more valuable here. Wait, what? Oh, Liliana wasn't on the battlefield. Oh, that was a misplay. I forgot. Liliana has to be on the battlefield to make the card draw effect go into effect. That's an oops. Well, sometimes you have to learn the hard way on those ones. So now the opponent is probably going to use the Elder Spell to destroy the Ashiok and Narset. Especially if they want their card draw. Yep. Bye-bye. What's their exile look like? It seems like we hated out a lot of their cards, so we might be in the potential clear. Still, that's a good pull. And the best part is, with like these gods in general, even if the opponent Vraska's Contempted or just kills it, we can just shuffle it back into our deck, which is nifty. So the opponent's just going to Fodder Erasure to dig into their deck more. Yeah, we're actually going to reveal that. To cast it on our own creature, mill our opponent's graveyard a little bit more. And the trick that always everybody forgets, you can actually do it on your own creature, and the creature doesn't die since the counters get added to it. And we pretty much, under except some fringe circumstances, won the game by surprisingly milling out our opponent. In theory. Good game, opponent. Woo! Wow. Okay, that was fun. Anyway, like I said, that's my own take on HeroMidrange. I'll leave the deck list in the description below, as well as the GP list down below, because I find both lists pretty fun. I hope you enjoy this alternative take on this deck tech / exploring deck archetype videos. If you like it more in this format, I might try it. Please comment whether or not if you like this format or not. If not, I might just go back to single kind of like deck tech kind of like videos and such, if that's a more suitable approach. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this session of exploring the deck archetype, and I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev, signing out.